It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with your host, Jamie Dew, Chief Librarian Thomas Senna, and featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, Jamie Dew.
Oh boy, I hope you are strapped in and ready to go because we have an absolute screamer for you today. But before we go any further, I'd like to ask you all a favor. Please wipe your feet before entering the hallowed ground of the Hall of Fame. You've got autumn filth all over the bottom of your shoes. We don't want that in here. Instead, we want great discussions about great performances in and around Studio 8H in New York City. That's right, we're talking about the best of the best on Saturday Night Live. And this week is no exception, as Thomas Senna is joined by Justin Renwick to have a titillating discussion about Elvis Costello. Now, for many of you, the musical guest portion of the show might be a time to get up and grab a snack or take a pee. But for me, I think back to some of those performances that moved me in a way that I hadn't been moved before by Saturday Night Live. Yes, there are sketches that have stuck with me through the years, but there are also really tremendous musical performances that have stuck with me through the years. Most recently, I think of Phoebe Bridgers appearing on SNL, and that performance captivated me in a way that made me collect her discography and really explore more about the artist, Phoebe Bridgers. In the past, I was able to discover Vampire Weekend through Saturday Night Live. I was able to discover The Counting Crows through Saturday Night Live. I was able to see one of my favorite bands, Faith No More, play and watch Mike Patton as he went absolutely berserk and climbed up inside the fan. These are moments that make Saturday Night Live special, and they are contributed by the musical guest who should be given equal billing to a certain degree to some of the comedy sketches. After all, the musical guest is almost 1/9 of the show. They're given almost 10 full minutes of a after commercials 65-minute program. Now, we haven't seen this reflected in the voting so far, as last year both Nirvana and Neil Young were dropped off the ballot for not achieving the minimum number of votes required to stay on the ballot. It's only 5%, folks. They didn't receive 5% of the vote. Neil frickin' Young. Frickin' Vana. So what I will tell you is there are still some tremendous musical guests to come this year that we'll be discussing. And there were some tremendous musical guests last year that we discussed. I implore you to go back and give those a listen and really consider, the entire tapestry that is SNL and the colors that the musical guests make in that tapestry. They are important. They are a big part of the show, and I would like to see that reflected in the vote. I'll get off my soapbox now. Speaking of voting, have you registered to vote yet? This year we're doing things a little differently, and the expectation will be that you register to vote so that I can send you your ballot when the time comes, and it'll be easy peasy lemon squeezy. All you need to do is go to snlhalloffame.com, snlhof.com, and click the register to vote button, and you'll be all set, ready to go. Speaking of ready to go, it's probably time that we unleashed our secret weapon, Matt Ardill, to give us some minutia about Mr. Costello. Matt, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. I'm good, thanks, Jamie. Glad to be here. This is one of my favorite musicians that we're talking about today, Elvis Costello, aka Declan Patrick McManus, D.P. Costello, The Imposter, Little Hands of Concrete, Napoleon Dynamite, Howard Coward, Mac McManus, Declan Patrick Pippi Go Mary Buttons, according to Stephen Colbert. He's a man of many names.
What?
Great talent. Yeah, he is.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, he's sort of played into that in his early punk career. He played into that sort of like David Bowie vibe of character-driven stuff. Yeah, his dad was actually a musician as well. He went by Day Costello. It's interesting because Elvis was born in 1959, one of 5 siblings, comes from a musical family. But early in his career, people thought he was actually his father pretending to be younger to cash in on the punk rock movement.
Oh, really?
So, he looked so much like his dad, and he had that sort of very old-fashioned look to him early in his career in this era when he did Saturday Night Live. His first appearance was in the season 3, episode 8, December 17th, 1977. That's the almost original cast. This is the second cast after Bill Murray had joined, after Chevy had left. And he was on a few times after that, including the 25th anniversary, on season 14, episode 15. That's the early Mike Myers and Dana Carvey era, when John Lovitz was on the cast, and then again a few years later in season 16, episode 20, May 18th, 1991. So this would be when the Chris's, Farley, and Rock were on the cast. So he's done 3 regular episodes and 1 special episode where he's been a big part of it. I'm sure today's episode is going to talk about Radio, and the controversy surrounding that moment, which is an interesting thing. I mean, he wasn't even supposed to be on the first episode. That's one of the things. I don't know if they talk about that at all. I'm looking forward to hearing that. But he was originally a fill-in for the Sex Pistols, who shockingly couldn't get across the border into the United States. I wonder why.
Well, there would have been no controversy had they shown up, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that would have gone on without any concern or worry. Yeah. So he's a terrific performer. As Stephen Colbert described him, an older male Avril Lavigne, but instead of singing about skateboarding, sings about people dying in shipyards. So he's a very talented guy. He's got a great sense of humor. He's done so much. He's just done so many incredible things. He's been in The Spy Who Shagged Me, so that's another SNL connection. Spice World, Joe Strummer's film Straight to Hell. He grew up. He grew up around music. His mother worked in a record store importing vinyl in the 60s and 70s. And her regular customers were Mick Jagger and Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac. So it kind of comes full circle, because he's even been on The Simpsons, and he was on Simpsons episode with Mick Jagger. And that's a show that has a lot of connection to SNL, with writers going back and forth. He's an interesting character, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about him on the episode.
Me too. So why don't we just jump right into that then?
Sounds great.
Okay, this is Thomas Senna in conversation with Justin Renwick. Take it away.
talk some Elvis Costello today. Justin, thank you so much.
Thank you again for having me. It's lovely to be a repeat guest. I enjoy it very much.
Yeah, sure thing. Of course, yeah, you were in season 1, so we're so glad to have you back. And so many SNL fans know about the incident involving Elvis Costello in season 3. But can you talk about where Elvis Costello was in his career and what was going on kind of leading up to that first SNL appearance in 1977?
Yeah, his father was a lounge singer, a singer with a group called the Joe Loss Orchestra. So Elvis, or Declan McManus as he was born, lived the music showbiz life basically growing up, and followed his father around to recording sessions, got to meet the Beatles when he was a kid. So the fact, everything was railroading him towards a career in music, but more importantly, he had this incredible gift for songwriting and melody, and had been in bands. He had a folk duo in the early 70s, and then he became part of what's known as the pub rock scene in England. To give you a very quick rundown, an American band went over to England to record an album. Everything fell apart. And it's like, we need to make some money, so let's go play in pubs. And they were playing basically, sort of 50s and 60s rock and roll, which was the complete opposite of what was happening in the music business in England and America at the time, where everything was, progressive rock and 10-minute organ solos and things like that. They were taking things back to basics, and it's really caught on. And that's where people like Nick Lowe came from, Ian Dury and the Blockheads. Joe Strummer was in a band called the 101ers before he was with the Clash. There's thousands, lots of bands I could talk about, but we'll try to stay on topic here. Elvis Costello's band was called Flip City, and sort of fit that vein. Elvis was also a big like Steely Dan fan, and I wouldn't say obscure, but lesser known American singers Randy Newman's very well known, but on a lower level, somebody like Jesse Winchester. If you've ever heard Jesse Winchester's first album, listen to it and then listen to My Aim Is True. And the similarities are eerie. He took a lot from that album, and not to paint him as being a copyist or anything, but it's just, if you're going to steal from somebody, steal from Jesse Winchester. So Flip City breaks up. He's now playing under DP Costello. Costello being his maternal grandmother's maiden name. DP was his initials, Declan Patrick McManus. And then he's working as a computer operator at Elizabeth Arden in London, outside of London, I believe, in case there's any London listeners or people from England that want to take me to task. No, it wasn't in London proper. Couldn't tell you where it was, but that's not important. Anyway, working as a computer operator there, writing songs at night, made a tape, a home tape, very quietly while his wife and young son were sleeping. Wound up sending it into a new upstart label called Stiff Records that had come out from a couple guys that managed probably the best known pub rock band, Dr. Feelgood. Basically a forerunner to punk, really. And people like Paul Weller, Joe Strummer were in the audiences for Dr. Feelgood shows, and the roots are all there. And then, winds up getting signed to Stiff Records, has a backing band behind him called Clover to make his first album, which he's making on sick days and weekends from his job, and gets released, starts selling very well in England, starts selling very well as an import in America. And then eventually he pulls a stunt where he was at a hotel in London where CBS Records or Columbia was having their, it was some kind of sales conference or whatever. And he wound up busking outside, wound up playing for Walter Yetnikoff, who was then the head of Columbia Records, and managed to get a deal out of Columbia with it in America. And it just all kind of went from there. Interesting story. He was put in jail for that. Really? For that busking. He was arrested and put in jail the night he was supposed to play a very important gig, and they managed to spring him out just in time.
I guess that was a good investment on his part. do some time for a night.
Yeah, exactly. So he he had that backing band and then needed to form his own band. So I think it was the spring and summer of 77. He put together the Attractions, three very, very seasoned, two very seasoned players. The piano player was a 19-year-old music student, Steve Naive, who happened to be amazing because they still play together today even. And Attractions go over, they're touring America. So this is in the winter of 77. I'm sure.
So they released My Aim Is True, right? So they released My Aim Is True that summer, just to kind of position
Yep.
ourselves to where we are.
Right.
So in the summer of 77, Elvis Costello and the Attractions released My Aim Is True. So that's the official first album.
This was Elvis Costello by himself, but with
by
a
himself.
backing band called Clover, who were from Marin County and the USA. Were playing over in England. Two of the members went on to be in Huey Lewis and the News, strangely enough. Yeah, and then late summer, the Watching the Detective single comes out, and that has Steve from the Attractions on it and two members of Graham Parker's band, The Rumor, as the rhythm section. But then it was around that time that he put the band together and they started working on their second album, This Year's Model. And I think it was in probably the late fall, or maybe it hadn't come out in America yet, but the Radio single, which is an important part of the story, has now come out. So yeah, they're over in America, the Attractions with Elvis touring relentlessly, because that's how you break a band. And it's coming up on the Anyone Can Host show on Saturday Night Live, which happens to be their Christmas show. That was the contest they ran in the third season. Anyone can host, 25 words or less on a postcard, why you should host the show. They picked an 80-year-old grandmother from New Orleans named Miskell Spillman. Her musical guest was supposed to be the Sex Pistols. Fortunately, the Sex Pistols had legal or visa problems, couldn't get in the country. So Malcolm McLaren managed to get in touch with Elvis's manager and said, hey, they need a, quote unquote punk group. Elvis Costello will tell you he is the furthest thing from a punk. But given that he was coming up in that time and his sound had that sort of 60s veneer to it and back to basics kind of playing, obviously you fall into that basket because you want to sell records. And then, they need a band. If we can arrange it, will you guys do the gig? And of course, who doesn't want to play on national television in America when you're trying to break an act?
Yeah, so this was season 3, episode 8, December 17th, 1977. And the first song that they played, Watching the Detectives, you had mentioned that was a single from My Aim Is True. It went off without a hitch.
She is watching the detectives. Oh, will they shoot. They beat him up until the teardrops start. But he can't fool it, does his God
And it was a really great performance. Just did the song. And so yeah, Watching the Detectives was the first song that Elvis Costello performed on the show. Sounded great. No issues with anything. So what happened with that second song?
Yeah, well, there's a few stories. So the second song, NBC said, we want you to play Less Than Zero, which had been his very first single in the U.S., which is a great song. But I would say, given the tempo of Watching the Detectives, which is also a great song that I love, you'd want to, show off the band's chops, play something a little heavier. So Radio would have been a good choice for me as well. It comes to his attention, Elvis Costello's attention, that NBC, who was owned by General Electric at the time, which owned a lot of radio stations, did not want Radio being played, because it was very critical of what had started at around that time, with corporations buying radio stations, formalizing the playlists, basing them on focus groups. Basically, everyone is drawing from the same 50 songs. Let's be generous and say it's 50 songs. And now radio has become homogenized. It's not guys like it was in the 60s and early 70s, people like Tom Donahue or like the real Don Steele, or I'm just mentioning American DJs because they're the first ones that are coming to mind. And there was plenty in Bob McAdory here in Canada as well. But they would pick their own music. They would come up with their own playlist. They'd hear a song, say, hey, this is a great song, I'm going to play it. And it, hopefully it catches on across the country and becomes a hit. So that wasn't happening anymore. And I would imagine there may have been some frustration on Elvis Costello's part because maybe he wasn't being played on the radio so much, but at least not at that time. Anyway, NBC doesn't want this song. You got to play Less Than Zero. So then, Elvis himself has talked about this a lot, and I think likes reliving the story because it's a very good one. The three things that I've heard, and I know this one for a fact because I've heard it. Elvis says he got the idea to abruptly change the song from Jimi Hendrix Experience being on the BBC in early January of '69. It was a show. The singer Lulu had her own variety show called, was it called Happening with Lulu, I think? Anyway, she wanted them to play Hey Joe, which had been their first single, which at this point now, it came out in late 1966, and things were moving so fast in the 60s. This thing is like old hat by then. And I would imagine for the band, especially because, you get tired of playing it every night. So he starts playing it, and then he just, we're not going to play this rubbish anymore. We're going to play this song by Cream. So they play Sunshine of Your Love because Cream had officially broken up a couple months before. And that was on live TV. And of course, that was very frowned upon and got Hendrix into a little bit of trouble, but didn't really hurt his career one iota. And then the other story I've heard is that Costello obviously agreed to, or at least tacitly agreed to play Less Than Zero. And apparently Dan Aykroyd told him he was a pussy for listening to them. So it could be any and all of these that led him to start playing Less Than Zero and then cut it off abruptly and launch into Radio. And of course, that throws the control room into complete chaos because it's like, we haven't blocked for this song. We don't know where to put the cameras. We don't know what he's going to do now. Is he going to swear? Is he going to strip? Right? And Lorne Michaels was very displeased that he had not been informed of this. So that led to Costello being banned from the show.
Yeah, and it could also mess up timing too. Maybe they timed out that performance and that would make prompt a decision as far as what sketches to run, after that. So it was kind of a big deal if you're running a TV show and something unexpected like that happens. And it was an act of rebellion and a punk kind of act on Elvis Costello's part.
I can completely see Lorne Michaels and NBC's position on it. It was kind of a shitty thing to do, but I'm also really glad he did it because it gave us this great moment of television. And as much as I love Less Than Zero, their performance of Radio is way beyond it.
Yeah, exactly. So he appeared on the show 11 seasons later in season 14. Yeah. But after this first album, My Aim Is True, he released 10 studio albums between that next SNL appearance. So is there anything noteworthy for you about his output between about 78 and 88 around there?
Well, full disclosure, I'm a massive Elvis Costello fan. So, My Aim Is True is an unassailably great album. This year's Model is as good or better. Armed Forces, it got even better. Then there was the awful barroom incident with Stephen Still's band that kind of derailed his career in America. I won't go too deeply into it, but basically Elvis was a little drunk and was trying to be provocative and ironic and used a certain word that begins with an N and ends with an R to annoy the people he was talking to. And again, to be the use of irony. Unfortunately, that's not a word you should use if you're trying to be ironic. It's not a word you should use at all. And exactly. I think he's more than well aware of that. But anyway, it really, album sales dropped off, radio play disappeared. So he was a bit out in the wilderness, but still released some great albums. The next album, Get Happy, was whether it was conscious or not, was a nod to old Motown and Stax. And then, by the time he was on the show that Mary Tyler Moore hosted, he hooked up with Paul McCartney, written some songs with him. Paul played some bass on the album as well, called Spike, which is a kind of a hodgepodge. Again, there's a lot of nods to like Cole Porter and Rodgers and Hammerstein, and then some more traditional Costello sounds. A lot of guests: Chrissie Hynde from the Pretenders, Jim McGuinn from the Byrds. I think Roy Orbison wound up covering one of the songs on the album as well. And anyway, Spike was sort of seen as a return to form, and he was on a new label now. He was with Warner Brothers, so I guess by then the old wounds had healed, and Lorne didn't feel bad about inviting him back, and he had a hit record now with the song Veronica, which was, I think it was about his grandmother that he got the last name from, but that may have been a great grandmother as well. Anyway,
okay, yeah. So Veronica is one of the songs that he co-wrote with Paul McCartney. McCartney played bass in the studio version of Veronica. That was actually the first song.
Oh, and you can hear it.
Yeah, you can totally hear it.
Such a good bass player.
Oh yeah, and that was the first song that he performed on that episode of SNL.
Do you suppose the ways that have eyes Veronica is gonna hide all the times she laughs and goes to shout her name and see the clothes. Veronica,
those were good performances. He performed Veronica and Let Him Dangle that night, and I really enjoyed those performances. What did you think?
I'm the wrong guy to ask because I just love Elvis Costello, but he is an incredible performer and always has a quality band behind him. I've seen him numerous times. I've not enough times to have this really mean too much, but I've never seen a bad show.
No, he's great. And it was also cool that G.E. Smith and the Saturday Night Live band performed with him for both songs that night. Yeah, I like when they do that. G.E. Smith was out front and center right next to Elvis Costello. And I think there was just a lot of energy. I'm really happy that he returned after the ban. And I was just kind of wondering, like, do you think that ban was somewhat overblown, or did it really take 11 years for kind of cooler heads to prevail?
I think if his career had continued on an up trajectory, if there hadn't been the Columbus barroom incident, he would have been on the show a lot sooner. He didn't have the push behind him that was there in the late 70s.
Yeah, he had a good interview over the last few years with Howard Stern, and I heard him say, maybe it was really recently actually, and I heard him say that he never had any animosity toward SNL and that he enjoyed himself, when he returned. So I think you're right. I think maybe it had a lot to do with just where he was in his career as opposed to bad blood there.
Well, plus, like, Lorne wasn't there between 1980 and 85. But Gene Domanian or Dick Ebersol didn't seem the need to bring him back either. So that could have been NBC's decision. But again, there were no hits, so really wasn't a reason to have him on the show. Yeah,
exactly. And so after a couple really great performances, again, he performed Veronica and Let Him Dangle.
Battery had surrendered, he was under arrest. He gave Chris Craig a fatal request. Craig shots in the mouth, he took Bentley's word. The prosecution claimed as they charged him with murder. Let him dangle.
He returned a little over 2 years later in the season finale, actually, of season 16. That was in May
George Wendt
of 1991. George Wendt hosted that show. And that was about the same week he released Mighty Like a Rose. So it was an interesting Costello to me aesthetically. He had that full bushy beard, long hair, sunglasses. In his first performance, when he performed The Other Side of Summer, he reminded me of Forrest Gump in the scenes where he was running across the country. Because he was wearing a hat too and had this long hair coming out, and I'm like, that's Forrest Gump when he was running across the country. So it was a little different look for Elvis Costello. I'm used to him being like a punk rock nerd kind of or like a Buddy Holly, I guess more of a punk rock Buddy Holly kind of look. But this was a neat look for Elvis Costello in his third SNL appearance. And said, so The Other Side of Summer was the first song he performed, and then So Like Candy, which was the second song performed that night.
One of my favorite Costello songs.
And it's significant too because it's another studio collaboration with Paul McCartney. I mean, they seem to work well together with other legends.
Well, especially with somebody like McCartney, because, and I think it was Paul McCartney that instigated the collaboration, because I guess he felt he wanted somebody acerbic like John Lennon to bounce ideas off of, because that's what made the Beatles so great, was the two of them, being on the same page and coming from the same place, but mood-wise being a little bit opposed. So it's good to have that kind of push and pull. I mean, anyone could argue this for ages, but I'll just go on record saying that the Beatles' solo output doesn't hold a candle to any of the actual Beatles recordings. It's because you don't have that person there saying, you know what, maybe instead of doing that there, try this. Maybe Silly Love Songs isn't a great idea for us.
Right. There's less checks and balances.
Maybe an album of screaming is not gonna sell. Much as I love Plastic Ono Band, I realize why it's not a hit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think So Like Candy was significant for me because the 6 performances, the 6 songs that he performed over his 3 times as musical guest on SNL, I think So Like Candy was my favorite one because it was just there was just so much heart, I think, that he was singing with.
There's atmosphere
that really
there.
stood out. Yeah, there's atmosphere, there's soul that's emanating from Elvis Costello. So I really enjoyed that performance of So Like Candy.
Yeah, it's very dynamic. Like, as much as I love the Attractions, they're kind of one thing, just like blast you against the wall punk sort of sound, which I love. But yeah, it's nice to have that dynamism that he had with that performance of So Like Candy as well.
Yeah.
He can do both with equal aplomb.
Yeah, definitely. So in my book, he was, out of 6 songs that he performed in SNL, I think he was 6 for 6 as far as quality.
Yeah.
And every single one of them was enjoyable to me. And full disclosure, I'm not one who totally focuses hard on the musical guests. There's some that stick out. A lot of times I'll get up and go get something to eat or go to the restroom or let my dogs outside or something.
Same here,
But performances like these kind of keep me glued, and especially something like So Like Candy, which was so atmospheric, kind of kept me glued to my screen. So Elvis Costello appeared again on the show in 1999 at actually the 25th anniversary show. So he had a good relationship with the show by then. So what do you remember about him appearing with the Beastie Boys on that show?
Yeah, I remember I didn't know anything about it because, I mean, the internet was around, but none of us, I shouldn't say none of us, I wasn't on it very much. And I really doubt there were any spoilers. Maybe there were, but I didn't know that was coming. Yeah, the Beastie Boys come out, they're playing Sabotage. It's like, all right, it sounds like kind of a perfunctory version. And then we realize why. Because Elvis Costello is about to reprise his stunt from 1977.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but there's just really no reason to do this song here tonight. 1, 2, 3, 4! I was sitting in the shining light, night dive, in that real vibes. Every one of those late night stations playing songs with the juice in my eyes.
Yeah, it was great. It was almost verbatim of what he said when he interrupted.
It was.
Less than zero. So yeah, that was just such a great moment, and just says a lot to me about Elvis Costello that he's willing to go on the show and have fun like that and reference something that happened 22 years prior. That was a really neat moment for me, and I bet the Beastie Boys were happy to have been definitely happy to have been a part of that with Elvis Costello.
Yeah, to be Attractions for an evening.
And he's actually been quite prolific. So he hasn't been a musical guest in over 30 years now, but he's been really prolific since his last official appearance as musical guest. Are there any just maybe a handful of standouts to you? Like, I know that's quite the span, but like, are there just some musical highlights from Elvis Costello in that span?
Painted from Memory. Painted from Memory is a great album. His most recent one, The Boy Named If, I just bought, and it's kind of a return to form. It's with the Attractions are back together, but the bass player Bruce Thomas isn't with them anymore. Apparently, there's a little too much bad blood between he and Elvis. But Davey Faragher, who was a member of Cracker, has been with him since I think it's the early 2000s. So they're a fiery unit. Going back to like '94, Brutal Youth was a return to form. And he did an album with Alan Toussaint, the famous New Orleans piano player and guy that probably wrote and played on just about every record that came out of New Orleans in the 50s and 60s.
All right. Yeah, awesome. So we definitely urge our listeners to go check out some of his output, some of the stuff that Justin had just mentioned. And Elvis Costello is still going strong, performing shows too. He just announced he's doing a string of 10 shows in New York City in February of 2023, where 200 unique songs are being planned. So not a lot of repeats in those shows. Do you have any plans on checking out any of those shows?
You know what? He was just in Toronto and I missed him.
Oh,
I didn't even know he was coming. Like since COVID, I just haven't been paying attention.
Yeah.
So then someone will post online, "Oh, I saw so and so last night." Like I didn't know they were coming to town. I would have gone to that. But even I say that, but even like now going to a concert, I'm still kind of, do I want to stand in a room full of people with or without masks?
I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
might have done that for Elvis Costello. Yeah, I probably would have kept myself masked the whole time, but
yeah,
I'm sorry I didn't get to see that show.
Yeah, so I think
he's still great. He's still got it.
Yeah, he definitely has a lot of energy still, and anybody who's in or around the New York City area for those 10 shows might be worth checking out. Seems like he's really putting a lot of thought into those shows. So what's your final case for Elvis Costello being in the SNL Hall of Fame?
I'm going to say for being part of one of the most notorious incidents in the show's history. I mean, even people that don't even know who Elvis Costello is know about it. Proving to any doubters out there that the show is definitely live. And we'll say for being the first British punk performer. I put punk in quotes because, as I mentioned, he was anything but a punk, but had a lot of similar sensibilities. Performer on the show, I'd say the first punk band that played was probably Patti Smith in 1976. But they were US, so we'll go with the first British punk band. And honestly, I don't think the Patti Smith group would call itself punk either. That word, early 76, it was sort of, I think it might have still kind of been up in the air.
Yeah, and I think also, in my opinion, batting 100% or batting 1,000 as far as performance quality and songs performed. I think he was 6 for 6 as far as as his performance quality. He has definitely performances that I would, as an SNL fan, go back and watch specifically for his musical performances. So yeah, thank you so much, Justin, for joining me, and very well said. Listeners, take heed and consider Elvis Costello for the SNL Hall of Fame.
Thank you so much, Justin Renwick and Thomas Senna. That was a terrific conversation about the merits of Elvis Costello. Justin, you know a lot about Elvis Costello. Holy jeez. I think you and Matt Ardill could go toe to toe. I would hate to see the two of you enter a steel cage because, unfortunately, only one would leave. Now, Elvis Costello had that very special, infamous moment. He got to come back for a second act, and then he got to seal the deal with a third act, and then, really bang home the argument with his appearance on the 40th anniversary. So I think that there is something to that, collection that merits a pretty strong case for his inclusion in the SNL Hall of Fame. Some of you out there may be shaking your heads and saying, well, the incident is akin to Sinead O'Connor tearing the picture of the Pop. It was a stunt. It was something that was unexpected and, uncalled for. Sinead O'Connor, however, didn't get to come back and re-perform and show her chops, and she's a tremendous artist. So she didn't get that opportunity that Elvis Costello did. And I think that there is something to that. Now, that being said, I don't think that Mr. Costello is necessarily a first ballot Hall of Famer. Unless you are an absolute, huge fan of his work, you might not vote him in the first time. Especially when you look at all the other tremendous musical acts that have been ignored up until this point. I think that this is probably a second or third ballot Hall of Famer. And that doesn't besmirch his appearance on the ballot or his opportunity for enshrinement. It simply, is a numbers game at some point, and it makes it very difficult. That's what I have to say about that. Now, without further ado, why don't we listen to this infamous moment? This is Radio from 1977 on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast.
Once again, here's Elvis Costello.
Calling Mr. Oswald with the swastika tattoo. The girls are vacancy waiting. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, there's no reason to do this song here. Radio. 1, 2, 3. I was tuning in the shine of the light, not dial, doing anything my radio advised. With every one of those late night stations playing songs bringing tears to my eyes. I was seriously thinking about having the receiver when the switch broke, cause it's old. They're saying things that I can hardly believe. They really think we're getting out of control. Radio is a sound salvation. Radio is cleaning up the nation. They say you better listen to the voice of reason. But they don't give you any choice cause they think that it's treason. So you had better do as you were told. You better listen to the radio. I wanna bite the hand that feeds them. I wanna bite that hand so badly. I wanna make them wish they never said. Some of my friends sit around every evening and they worry about the times ahead. And everybody else is overwhelmed by indifference and the promise of an early bed. You either shut up or get cut out. They don't wanna hear about it. It's only pictures of the real to real. And the radio is in the hands of such a lot of fools trying to anesthetize the way that you feel. It's a sound salvation. Radio is cleaning up the nation. So you better listen to the voice of reason. But they don't give you any choice because they think that it's treason. So you had better do as you were told. You better listen to the radio.
So that's what all the fuss was about. It seems rather trivial now to hear when you hear it, but you can imagine, part of the term, being a fly on the wall and seeing all the chaos going on, behind the scenes at SNL. Lorne must have been pulling his hair out. I can't imagine he likes to be surprised in that kind of way. So it's really quite fascinating. But I think that moment, coupled with, his supplementary performances, and especially being invited to the 40th and getting a prime spot to perform Radio, really does tell you what Lorne and the gang at SNL feel about Elvis Costello. This was a tremendous amount of fun for me to listen to. I hope it was for you as well. So for Thomas Senna and Matt Ardill, we would like to thank our guest, Justin Renwick. And please, before you leave, turn out the lights, because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNLHOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.